Hi, it's Katrina. Today we'll be checking out Atlantis in Russia, the oldest glyphs in North America, and the shocking truth behind ley lines. These are just some of the hidden ancient secrets I have in store for you today, so hit that subscribe button and let's go. The Phaistos Disc Mystery. The Phaistos Disc is one of those archaeological mysteries that is so perplexing it doesn't even seem real, but it is. I hope over the next few minutes we can get a little closer to decoding this mystery. In 1908, Italian archaeologist Luigi Pernier excavated the haunting ruins of Phaistos on the Greek island of Crete. He broke into an underground depository, and in the dark, forgotten chamber, Luigi found burned bones, ashes, and dust. He also found one single artifact, a golden-colored disc covered in inexplicable symbols. The disc is a large fired clay plate, something you'd expect to find in a Minoan ruin from the 15th century BC. It's thick, with both sides covered in untranslated characters. What I find fascinating about the disc is how the symbols circle it clockwise, slowly spiraling towards the center. There are 45 different symbols, each one totally unique. They weren't carved, but rather stamped into the fired clay using hieroglyphic seals. It's believed the underground depository where the disc had been hiding collapsed more than 2,000 years ago, either from an earthquake or a volcanic eruption. Whatever calamity caused it to collapse likely helped destroy all of Phaistos. The city had been one of the most important cities for the Minoan civilization. It was extremely wealthy, populated by thousands, and home to mythical characters. Phaistos was the seat of King Rhadamanthus, who was the brother of King Minos. Minos was the guy who every 9 years fed 7 young boys and 7 young girls to the Minotaur he kept in his labyrinth dungeon. That was on the other side of Crete. So let's get back to the disc. I don't think we're going to solve the mystery of the Minotaur today, but check back with me tomorrow because you never know. The strange symbols on the disc are not unique to it. What I mean is that they've been found elsewhere in Crete, like on the Archelocori axe, another really cool artifact. Archaeologists are convinced the symbols are part of a legitimate language, perhaps the language known as Linear A, which to this day remains indecipherable. It's been more than 100 years since scientists started analyzing the Phaistos disc. Even with AI, computer programs, and seemingly boundless knowledge, scientists remain stumped. They don't know what the symbols mean. Nobody knows what the Phaistos disc was used for. Some experts have been so disturbed by the indecipherable nature of the disc, they've tried to call it a hoax, just so they didn't have to deal with it anymore. The oldest glyphs in America. The oldest known petroglyphs in North America have been found in, guess where? Nevada! There's more to Nevada than Las Vegas. It's hard to stress how important of a discovery this is. What secrets are kept in the shallow lines of the glyphs? That's what scientists are trying to figure out. Scientists like Larry Benson. He was the man who dated the petroglyphs to an astonishing 15,000 years old. Larry said a mysterious group of Native Americans carved complex rock art into a pile of boulders near what is now the city of Reno. When Larry Benson found them, he knew the glyphs were old, but he hadn't imagined they were that old. Larry has been an archaeologist since he was a young boy. Growing up in Missouri, he would hunt for Native American arrowheads in farmers' fields. As a man, he continued to pursue his love for archaeology by studying rock art across America. The glyphs chiseled into the boulders near Reno are unlike anything Larry has studied during his lifetime obsession. They were made by one of the first groups of people to live in North America. This was a civilization whose culture is an utter mystery to historians. It's like a big black hole in the history book of humanity. They didn't leave any weavings or pottery behind, nothing but strange symbols carved in stone. Almost every surface of the boulder pile near Reno is covered in confusing geometric patterns. There are concentric circles, diamond shapes, and things that sort of look like trees. The grooves are also really deep, which is unusual. Normally, petroglyphs are scratched onto the surface of rocks, but here they were carved almost an inch deep, as if whoever made them never wanted them to fade. So what could the symbols mean? Could they be star charts, a way that Native Americans could map the cosmos? Or were they made by a group of pesky teenagers because they were bored? Let me know what you think in the comments. If you've actually been to the site near Reno, I'd love to hear about your experience. The Russian Atlantis. There is an ancient city in Russia that nobody has ever seen before because it's invisible. I know it sounds crazy, but hear me out. The story of Kites, the Russian Atlantis, is going to have you believing in the impossible. The first written mention of an invisible city in Russia is from the 1780s. The Old Believers is a very strange branch of the Russian Orthodox Church. In 1666, they protested against church reforms and broke away, becoming their own religious group. It was the Old Believers who first wrote down the stories of Kites. According to their chronicles, the city of Lesser Kites was founded in the Middle Ages by the Grand Prince of Vladimir in the early part of the 13th century. It was constructed on the edge of the Volga River in central Russia. This was only one part of the city. A second city known as Greater Kites was built slightly upstream. Over the next few years, monasteries and churches were built in large numbers inside the city walls. Greater Kites became a holy city, a place that welcomed Christian pilgrims from across Russia. Then came the destruction. In 1238, a horde of warriors you might be familiar with came knocking on the door of Lesser Kites. I'm talking about the Golden Horde, the legendary Mongols under the leadership of Batu Khan. The Mongols destroyed Lesser Kites and then turned their attention to Greater Kites, but they couldn't find it. They knew they had to torture their captives until someone finally spilled the beans about the secret path to reach the city. What happened next is obscure in the chronicles. The prince hid all the holy relics in a lake and then went out to meet the Mongols. He died in battle. It's said that upon the prince's death, God made the city of Greater Kites invisible so that it wasn't burned down by the Mongols. When they couldn't find it, the Mongols went on pillaging elsewhere. There are no other records of what happened to the city, but in the 800 years since the Mongol invasion of Russia, plenty of strange legends have taken shape. One piece of folklore is that the city was submerged in the lake by the will of God to protect it from the Mongols. There are some who think the city is still at the bottom of Lake Svetloyar today, which is how Kites earned its nickname, the Russian Atlantis. Scientists doubt the city was picked up and put into the lake by the hand of God. Instead, they believe the city was caught in a landslide. It could have been pushed into the lake in a big heap of rubble and muck before the Mongols could reach it. Talk about good timing. In 2011, an archaeological expedition searched Lake Svetloyar for traces of an ancient city. Amazingly, they found what they were looking for. Archaeologists identified what looked to be pieces of crumbling stone from medieval buildings. They also found fragments of Russian pottery. The physical evidence shows there is indeed a city under the lake, shattered to bits. But was it put there by God or by a natural disaster? Maybe both? I'll let you come to your own conclusions. It's shout-out time! I want to give a huge thank you to the Beavis G for the generous super thanks. Thanks so much for your support. We wouldn't be here without you. If you are new here, be sure to hit that subscribe button to join the Origins Explained family. The secrets of the Holy Lands. As Jesus Christ hung nailed to a giant wooden cross, somebody poked him with 2,000 years later. The instrument of the stabbing is one of the most coveted artifacts in the world. According to the Bible, a centurion named Longinus, who happened to be blind, wanted to check if Jesus was dead. So he stabbed him in the side with his spear. When he did, blood and water squirted out of the wound in a rather grotesque fashion. Longinus took some of the gore in his eyes. When he wiped it away, he wasn't blind anymore. Jesus Christ's blood had given him perfect vision. The legend goes on to say that Longinus converted to Christianity shortly after. He ultimately became a martyr himself and was crucified for his beliefs in the year 45 AD. His spear, soaked in the Messiah's blood, was supposedly imbued with incredible supernatural power. Ever since that fateful day, assuming any of this really happened, kings, emperors, and madmen have hunted for the Holy Lands. The first man to make it his mission to find the relic was Emperor Charlemagne in the 8th century AD. After Charlemagne tracked down the legendary spear, he kept it with him on 47 successful military campaigns. The one time he left the lance at home, he died on the battlefield. From that moment on, people were convinced the lance had power. It was said to give whoever wielded it the ability to conquer any lands unopposed. You can understand why kings wanted it so badly. The next owner of the Holy Lance was King Henry the Fowler of the Saxons. After his death, the spear was handed down from generation to generation. In the early part of the 12th century, it came into the hands of Frederick Barbarossa, warrior king and ruler of the Holy Roman Empire. With the mighty spear at his disposal, Frederick conquered half of Italy and battled in the Third Crusade. But just like Emperor Charlemagne, he made a mistake. While fighting in the Holy Land in 1190, he dropped the spear in a creek. Minutes later, Frederick drowned trying to get it back. In 1424, the weapon was supposedly recovered from the creek where Frederick dropped it centuries earlier. It was taken to Nuremberg, where it was to be kept for the rest of time. In 1796, Napoleon Bonaparte was on the warpath. As the French forces got closer to Nuremberg, locals realized the Holy Lance was in danger. It was taken from the city to a safe place in Vienna, Austria. Napoleon was furious. In 1805, Napoleon won the Battle of Austerlitz. He had been hoping that after the battle he would be able to loot the lance, stealing it from where it had been hidden. Only it had been smuggled out of Vienna before the battle. For the second time, the forces of the universe prevented Napoleon from getting his hands on the relic. But do you know who did get the Holy Lance in the next century? It was Adolf Hitler. On October 13, 1938, the Holy Lance was put on a train and taken back to Nuremberg, where it was stashed at the St. Catherine's Church. 7 years later, the Nazis were defeated and American forces took the lance. It was eventually returned to Vienna. The big difference between Hitler and the emperors of old was that Hitler didn't carry the Holy Lance around with him. Maybe if he had, he would have won World War II. That's enough of the legends. Let's take a look at reality. The spear is real in the sense that there are 4 of them. There is one in Armenia, one in Poland, one in Italy, and one in Austria. How is anyone supposed to know which spear pierced Christ's side? The one in Austria is the most famous. It's the one supposedly wielded by Charlemagne. In 2003, Austria allowed British metallurgist Robert Feather to conduct scientific tests on the weapon. He couldn't find any traces of blood or DNA on it, but he did date the object to the 7th century AD. Do you think the Holy Lance could still be around? Let me know in the comments below. The ghostly tombs of Pinara. What mysteries are hidden in the dark caverns of the Pinara tombs? It's a question you can't help but ask yourself when looking at these amazing ancient ruins. The settlement of Pinara is not particularly popular in the history books. There is only one reliable mention of it in a manuscript written by a Lycian historian 2,400 years ago. His name was Menecrates. He wrote that the city of Xanthos experienced a boom in population. 3 smaller settlements were built to accommodate the surge in people. One of them was Pinara. The city stood until 334 BC when it fell to the sword of Alexander the Great. And that's pretty much it. Almost nothing else of relevance is known about Pinara, and that's what's kind of intriguing about it. This place is remote, only reachable by following a dirt road into the Turkish wilderness. When you hit the end of the unnamed road, you have to hike up a hill and into a sort of rocky valley. It's there, at the base of a cliff, in the cool shade, that the honeycomb ruins and dark tombs are there to greet you. Maybe I'm being a little dramatic here, but I really want to convey how isolated the ruins of Pinara really are. The remoteness puzzles archaeologists because they don't know why anyone would build a city in such a weird place. In Pinara, you can find an amphitheater, an acropolis, an agora, temples, public baths, broken neighborhoods, and deeply dark tombs carved into the cliffs. The site is surprisingly vast, with the ruins spread out and in somewhat good condition. But hey, there's one thing I've left out, and it's the weirdest thing of them all. Archaeologists have identified an unusual number of carved phalluses at the site. The people who lived in Pinara in the 4th century BC were obsessed with molding stone into the shape of, well, why would people do this? The best guess researchers have is that Pinara was home to a rare cult that practiced phallic worship. It is definitely as weird as it sounds. This was a hermit village where people prayed to the male reproductive organ. What do you think? There were a lot of strange things going on in ancient times. The weird history of pickles. Let's talk about pickles. Love 'em or hate 'em, pickles might not seem like the most fascinating subject, but I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Especially when I start dropping some big names. Cleopatra, Julius Caesar, Napoleon Bonaparte, and Christopher Columbus all had one thing in common. They loved pickles. The secret of pickles goes back long before any of them. According to the New York Food Museum, Mesopotamia was the first civilization to figure out how to pickle food in 2400 BC. Weird, right? Way back in the day, Mesopotamians were dunking foods in vinegar and brine. They purchased cucumbers from India and turned them into the world's first pickles. See, I told you it was going to be interesting. Fast forward to the year 50 BC, Cleopatra was obsessed with pickles. She consumed mass amounts of pickles because she believed they contributed to her health. Cleopatra attributed her world-renowned beauty to the pickle. Cleopatra's lover, the legendary Julius Caesar, also relied on pickles. Only Caesar didn't care as much about his beauty as he did about feeding his troops. The Romans believed pickles worked on their soldiers like spinach worked on Popeye. This next bit of info is for all you dill pickle lovers out there. The next time you crunch down on a dill pickle chip, you can thank the Indonesian island of Sumatra. Around the year 900, dill from Sumatra arrived in Western Europe and blended with the pickle. Then there's Mr. Christopher Columbus, the man who rationed pickles to his sailors in the 15th century. Not much had changed since the days of the Romans. Christopher Columbus was so reliant on pickles that when he stopped in Haiti, he grew cucumbers so that he could restock his pickle supply for the journey home. Dutch farmers were selling cucumbers in Brooklyn out of barrels on the streets in the 1650s. In 1809, Napoleon Bonaparte offered $250,000 in cash to the man who could figure out the best way to pickle food for his troops. Not quite pickles, but the pickling process. French chef Nicolas Appert won the competition. He figured out that removing the air from bottles was the way to go. You can thank him for your jar of jelly staying fresh for so long. Anyway, that's the long and weird history of pickles. I hope you had as much fun as I did, and be sure to share these fun facts with your friends. Queen Maeve and her sealed grave. What does this look like to you? Without any context, I think it looks like a giant pile of gravel like you see at a construction site. But it isn't gravel, and this is no construction site. What you're looking at is an unopened grave on the summit of a mountain in Ireland that might belong to a mythical queen. Also, the image is from an old postcard, courtesy of Ireland's National Monument Service. This is the cairn of Miscown, also called Queen Maeve's Cairn. It is huge, 630 feet in circumference and towering above Sligo Bay, yet it used to be even bigger. In the 19th century, locals kept stealing rocks from it to build their own stuff. It's a miracle that after 5,500 years, the grave remains sealed. Archaeologists believe the mound was constructed by a nameless civilization known only as the Passage Grave culture. These prehistoric people arrived in Ireland from the shores of Brittany about 6,200 years ago. They didn't leave much behind except for their cairns and passage graves. Queen Maeve's cairn was built from 30,000 tons of stone. But just who was Queen Maeve anyway? In Irish folklore, she was a warrior queen. Her name translates to intoxicating in the Old Irish language. She was said to be so beautiful that men grew drunk just by looking at her. The chronicles claim Queen Maeve was born to the High King of Ireland. She was a princess, and she eventually made it to the throne, marrying the King of Ulster. However, it was an unhappy union. Not to worry, the marriage didn't last forever. Queen Maeve took many husbands over the years. all of them kings. Some of them she even went to war against. There are dozens of stories of her exploits, her sour marriages, and her victories in battle. If she was a real person, that's yet to be seen. Most scholars think Maeve was a fictional character, likely a manifestation of the ancient sovereignty goddess Med-Lethurg. Whatever the case may be, Queen Maeve's cairn remains one of the most captivating burials on the planet, simply for the fact that nobody will open it. It's incredibly rare for a tomb of this magnitude to be sealed tighter than a pickle jar. If somebody ever does excavate this thing and finds the bones of a woman warrior, it could confirm Queen Maeve's existence. But for now, the secret of the grave stays buried. I kind of like it that way. What do you think? The magnetic mysteries of Mesopotamia. Scientists are combining archaeology and the Earth's magnetic field in a way that is nothing short of science fiction. They are calling it archaeomagnetism. It uses the magnetic field of the planet to date archaeological artifacts. It's already been done in Mesopotamia thanks to Professor Mark Altawil and his colleagues. They studied ancient clay bricks inscribed with the names of legendary kings. When the bricks were fired in kilns, the magnetic field of the Earth imprinted on the iron oxide grains deep inside. The thing about the magnetic field is that it's always fluctuating. When minerals reach a certain temperature, they become extra sensitive to the magnetic field. It leaves a mark on the minerals, sort of like a timestamp on your photos. When Mark and his team analyzed 32 clay bricks from various archaeological sites in modern Iraq, they were able to see what the magnetic field was at the time the bricks were heated by brickmakers. Thanks to the names of reigning kings inscribed on the bricks, archaeologists could pinpoint the exact date they were made. This led to an unusual revelation. The bricks from Mesopotamia indicate there was a strong magnetic event about 3,000 years ago. This is amazing because evidence of the event has been found in other places like China, Bulgaria, and the Azores. All across the planet, ancient bricks have shown evidence of a massive magnetic event. But what happened? Was it similar to the magnetic event that just occurred in May, when the northern lights were visible way farther south than normal? Archaeomagnetism is still in its infancy. As scientists continue to link the planet's energy with ancient sites, they are bound to uncover more unexpected secrets. English ley lines. Ancient secret or modern fairy tale? England is crisscrossed with invisible energy lines that radiate power. Not just England, but the whole world. These invisible lines of pulsating mystical energy are called ley lines. But are they real? You might be surprised to learn that ley lines are not a secret dating back to the days of the Druids, nor to the builders of Stonehenge. The term didn't appear until after World War I. Alfred Watkins was a city councillor and farmer who lived in rural Herefordshire. He fancied himself an amateur archaeologist. It was in 1921 that he looked down upon the landscape and noticed a grid of straight lines. He described them as glowing wires stretching across the surface of the country. Alfred noticed the lines seemed to intersect with all the most important buildings: standing stones, beacon hills, burial mounds, churches, and prehistoric ruins. This led Alfred to come up with a theory. He believed the lines were the byproduct of Roman ingenuity. He thought that 2,000 years ago, during the Roman occupation of Britain, the Romans built the first major roads on the island. The Romans built their roads in straight lines by connecting features that were easy to spot, places like stone circles and tall hills. Then, over the centuries, important places continued to be built along the old Roman roads, like cemeteries and churches. Alfred didn't come up with the idea of magical energy lines. He thought England's ley lines were Roman roads. Then, after World War II, the mystics got involved. Royal Air Force pilot Tony Wedd started publishing leaflets claiming the ley lines were created by prehistoric societies to guide alien spacecraft. By 1969, writers had gone overboard with the idea. Spiritualist author John Mitchell wrote that ley lines followed natural Earth energies. England soon became home of the New Age movement. Everyone thought ley lines crisscrossed the planet like fissures of power leaking above ground. People still believe in the secret power of ley lines, and there's nothing wrong with that. I just want you to know the whole mystery was an invention of imaginative writers less than 80 years ago. What do you think? Is there any truth to this theory? Let me know in the comments below. Neanderthals invented penicillin. Turns out Neanderthals invented penicillin and aspirin 40,000 years before Homo sapiens. It's true, and it's shocking. How did Neanderthals get so smart? What is it that scientists are missing? Of course, Neanderthals didn't invent penicillin in a laboratory. They used natural ingredients to make it outside. The same natural ingredients humans needed an industrial revolution and modern technology to turn into medicine. This unbelievable revelation was made thanks to a Neanderthal skeleton found in Central Europe. A team of international scientists scraped the dental tartar from the skeleton's preserved teeth. They wanted to learn more about the ancient person's life, things like diet and health. They took the dental tartar and sequenced the DNA in it, and that was when the mic dropped. The lead researcher in the project was Professor Alan Cooper, the director of the University of Adelaide's Australian Centre for Ancient DNA. Alan said the DNA sequencing showed the Neanderthal was self-medicating, and for good reason. He had a dental abscess, which, as you might know, seriously sucks. He also had gastrointestinal parasite, which, as you might know, also sucks. Or at least you can imagine. Alan said the Neanderthal was not a happy guy, but there he was, trying to make things better by eating aspirin and penicillin. The suffering Neanderthal must have had extremely good knowledge of medicinal plants. He knew exactly which plants would alleviate the pain and which would work as natural antibiotics. For the pain, the Neanderthal chose bark from a poplar tree. The bark contained a chemical related to aspirin. This part isn't terribly shocking because ancient people were known for natural pain remedies. It's the mold that he was eating as an antibiotic that has scientists with their jaws on the floor. People didn't even know antibiotics were a thing until penicillin was developed in 1928 by Sir Alexander Fleming. He was taking some cultures and discovered that his bacteria had become contaminated by a fungus or a mold, which later became penicillin. For a creature not even technically human to know about antibiotics is legitimately shocking. A tomb in the valley. Some really weird artifacts have been found in Egypt's Valley of the Kings. Archaeologists discovered 4 deposits buried in a section of the valley called the Valley of the Monkeys. Each deposit contained a mix of artifacts, including things like painted vases, flint blades, and the severed heads of cows. What a weird thing to bury in the desert. Scientists are trying to figure out what the point of it was. As you may already know, the Valley of the Kings was the premier destination for dead pharaohs during Egypt's New Kingdom between 1550 and 1070 BC. Normally, when something's discovered here, it has something to do with a tomb. In fact, archaeologists were kind of hoping the deposits would lead them to an undiscovered tomb. The objects were likely deposited as a ritual offering just before construction began on a yet undiscovered tomb. It was the ancient equivalent of a ribbon-cutting event. Even though the tomb isn't found yet, archaeologists remain hopeful. New discoveries like this show just how much of the Valley of the Kings is still hiding under the sand. Cracking the code of the Indus Valley script. The Phaistos Disc isn't the only old relic that hasn't been deciphered. In India, not a single artifact found from the Indus Valley civilization has ever been translated. The Indus Valley script is considered one of the greatest secrets of the ancient world. The script might not even be a script. All archaeologists know for sure is that throughout the ruins of India's first major civilization, tablets and relics have been found covered in symbols that don't correspond to any known language. One of the scientists desperate to solve the Indus script mystery is Asko Parpola at the University of Helsinki in Finland. He started trying to decipher the script in 1968 and is still at it. After more than 50 years, he's still pretty much at square one. The earliest examples of the Indus script date to around 5,500 years ago. Characters from the script have been discovered on pottery shards excavated from the destroyed metropolis of Harappa. There are thousands of inscriptions from around 60 excavation sites. There certainly isn't a shortage of evidence that the script was used, yet the code can't be cracked. The people of the Indus Valley used this method of writing for 2,000 years. Surely somebody can figure out what it says, right? There are some things about the script that make it more confusing than it should be. Almost all the inscriptions are very short. The average length of an Indus script inscription is 5 characters. Not a single one is longer than 26 characters. These people were not writing novels, that's for sure. They didn't write anything longer than a Facebook post. It's the briefness of every single inscription that has led some scientists to speculate whether the script was a form of writing at all. But if the script wasn't used used as a form of writing, what was it for? It could have been a way to identify people. The script may have been for names only. It also could have been strictly used in business transactions, with these symbols representing numbers or bundles of goods. Scientists know the Indus Valley traded with Mesopotamia, but these are all just guesses that scientists have repeated over the past couple centuries. The truth is, the whole situation is crazy. Over 400 basic characters have been identified as part of the script, yet only 31 of those 400 characters have been seen over 100 times. The other 369 characters only show up every once in a while. What's up with that? I don't have any answers, and neither do the biggest brains in the world. The Indus script may never be translated. It's worth noting that the Indus Valley civilization is an anomaly, even without their bizarre language. Researchers don't think they had kings or queens. They don't appear to have had an elite class at all, nor a military, or a religion. Of all the great civilizations that rose at the dawn of humanity, this one is the most confounding. What are your thoughts on the Indus Valley script? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want to see more like this, be sure to stick around for an older video that you might have missed.
Where did the Knights Templar meet? The Knights Templar had one mission: to protect the Holy Land and the European pilgrims who wished to travel there. After the First Crusade in the year 1099, Christian armies captured the great city of Jerusalem from the Muslims, but the surrounding area was still controlled by Muslims, so European Christians struggled to get to Jerusalem because it was extremely dangerous. In the year 1118, the French knight Hugues de Payens created a small military order to help the pilgrims reach the Holy Land safely. This was the beginning of the Knights Templar, who would go on to become one of the richest and most feared military groups in human history. They were also one of the most secretive groups ever. The Crusaders built underground meeting places and secret fortresses all across Europe. One of them is underneath the city of Akko in Israel, an underground fort over 3 square miles. It's just one of many hidden gathering places built by the Templars during the 12th and 13th centuries. The subterranean fortress in Akko was probably used for about 200 years, up until the Ottoman rulers took over the city. They then built their own structures directly on top of the fortress, and it was only recently that archaeologists uncovered the forgotten Templar meeting place. Perhaps one of the most impressive places relating to the Templars was Colossae Castle. This was once a major Crusader stronghold in Cyprus. It actually served as the Grand Commandery for the Knights before they were all killed or exiled. You can see other structures built by the Knights Templar in many places in Europe, the Middle East, and Northern Africa, such as the Temple Church of London and the Templar Church of Veracruz in Spain. The list goes on and on. Ancient Jericho. Jericho is mostly well known because it's mentioned in the Bible, but it's so much more than just a biblical city. Jericho, located on the West Bank, was the very first city in history to have walls. Jericho is considered one of the earliest continuously inhabited settlements in the world, occupied for the past 11,000 years since 9000 BC. Archaeologists have discovered proof of hunters from the Mesolithic era, evidence of the hunters' descendants thousands of years later, and the earliest remains of stone walls. This was the very first human settlement that put up walls to protect itself from the outside world. At least it's the first one that we have proof of. This in itself makes Jericho one of the most mystical places in the world. At a time when many people were still nomads or living in caves, Jericho was a magical city with high walls, defensive towers, and about 3,000 or so people living inside. Jericho's dark secret is just how much blood has been spilled on its grounds over the past several thousand years. Jericho is mentioned in the Bible as the very first town attacked by the Israelites. It was completely destroyed, then abandoned until around the 9th century BC. There was more fighting and more bloodshed, and the entire city was eventually moved about 1 mile to the south, then occupied by the Romans. In the days of the Crusaders, Jericho was moved once more a mile east of its original site from the Old Testament, and there, the city still stands. Paititi, the lost city of the Inca. The city of Cusco is at the heart of the ancient Inca civilization. It's from Cusco that tourists began their pilgrimages to places like Machu Picchu, and where they descend to the South American jungle. For the last few hundred years, explorers have been coming to Cusco in search of a mysterious lost city in a land of sultry heat and exotic jungle. This place is supposedly hiding somewhere deep in the fantastic world of the Peruvian Amazon, and it's called the Lost City of Paititi. Discovering the lost city would be incredible for one main reason. It would show that the Inca lived deep in the jungle, something nobody really believed until recently. It wasn't until 1979 that explorers Nicole and Herbert Cartagena discovered the settlement of Mameria, providing the very first proof that the Inca lived in the Amazon, not only up in the Andes Mountains. How do we even know there's a lost Inca city in the jungle? The issue is, we don't. Not really. In the year 1600, Spanish missionary Andrés López wrote to the Vatican that there was a lost city in the Amazon which contained a massive quantity of gold, and it was called Paititi. It was supposedly a mythical place, completely unlike all the other Inca cities high up in the mountains. Even though explorers have searched for it year after year, it still remains undiscovered. Ancient Bagan. Ancient Bagan is the closest you can get to visiting Shangri-La here on Earth. It's one of the greatest archaeological wonders in the world, located in a place not too many people have been to. It's in Southeast Asia in Myanmar, formerly known as Burma. Bagan is hardly as popular as Angkor Wat in Cambodia, but it is even more mystical. Bagan was once the capital city of the powerful Pagan Kingdom and the very first Burmese Empire. It remained the capital from between the year 1044 until 1297. And now the place is nothing but a massive ruin. There are over 2,500 Buddhist monasteries, temples, and stupas left over from when the city had been one of the greatest places in all of Asia. And yet that's only a quarter of how many monuments there were at the height of the kingdom. In the 13th century, there were over 10,000 of these monuments dotting the landscape, making Bagan look like Shangri-La shining in the sunlight. To give you an idea of just how huge the archaeological site is these days, most tourists have to view it from a hot air balloon. The whole zone covers roughly 8 miles by 5 miles. Like much of the world in the 13th century, Bagan fell prey to the Mongol Empire. Invasion by the Mongols decimated the Pagan kingdom, and political upheaval lasted all the way into the 16th century. Big thank you to Juan Dominguez and Erica Russell for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos like these. Mysterious barbarian lands. From between the years 43 and 410, all the lands north of Hadrian's Wall were considered the lands of the barbarians. For the Romans, this was a dark and secretive place filled with death, magic, and terror. They just couldn't conquer the people who lived in what is now northern Britain and Scotland. The Romans tried to take over Scotland 3 times, and each time was a failure. But they did actually stretch their territory a little beyond Hadrian's Wall, as far north as Moray Firth. The Roman fleet also sailed around Scotland to try and take them by sea, but nothing ever worked. Scotland remained one of the only places in Europe not conquered by the Romans. To this day, scholars don't know why. Were the warriors too fierce for the Romans to fight? Was the landscape too rough and strange? Or maybe it was just too expensive? Whatever the reason, Scotland remained forever the northern frontier, a land that could not be beaten even by the mighty Roman Empire. Southern Egypt. The lands of southern Egypt are not only steeped in mystery, but they hold many secrets that we may never uncover. Way farther up the Nile, far from the pyramids and closer to its source, there is a desert land that holds some of Egypt's greatest monuments. Take Karnak, for example, the largest temple complex in all of Egypt. It's so big that you could put 10 ordinary cathedrals inside of it and still have room. It's home to the impossible Temple of Amun-Ra, huge columns covered in hieroglyphics, and a history of over 30 pharaohs. Karnak was built, destroyed, rebuilt, burned down, and rebuilt again over a period of about 1,500 years. And immediately across from Karnak, down an avenue which was once lined for miles with Sphinx statues on either side, you arrive at Luxor Temple, another place of great mystery. Luxor Temple was built in the ancient capital of Thebes in the 13th century BC and has been in almost continuous use as a place of worship ever since. It's been used so long as a place of worship, one of its biggest secrets is that Muslims tried to repurpose it and turn it into a mosque during medieval times. The structure has changed so much over the years under debris and rubble that the front door of the mosque is now located halfway up a wall. Islamic frescoes can be seen covering some portions of ancient Egyptian carvings. And if you go back even further, there are faded paintings from the early Christian era painted over the hieroglyphics. The Galdra Bok of Iceland. The Galdra is an ancient book of magic from Iceland. It's actually one of the most important documents from Iceland's medieval era and gives a glimpse into a faraway land where occult practices were the norm. When the Galdra was written, Iceland was going through a reformation, and at the time, the entire nation was caught up in magical traditions. According to Stephen Flowers, who translated the book to English in 1989, there are a lot of really important details inside the manuscript. He says it's the only archaic book that goes into specifics about Germanic gods, magical practices, and cosmology and astrology. Iceland was wildly different from the rest of Europe, probably because they were on an island. As Christianity spread and everyone started being ruled by the Catholic Church, they were able to maintain their traditions for much longer. They were proud of their Nordic roots and were significantly more difficult to manage than the rest of Europe. Plus, they lived in a land supposedly populated by fairies and other creatures, where volcanoes frequently went off and filled the sky with fire. The Galdra goes into detail about intentional spells, magically motivated spells, protective formulas, spells for bringing good fortune, and aggressive forms of magic that could hurt people, and everything else you could think of. The Duk. The Duk is a secret society from a faraway land. They are a subset of people from the traditional culture of the Tolai in the area of New Britain. They live on the largest island in the Bismarck archipelago off the coast of the island of New Guinea. Just like the ancient Icelandic people, the Duk live in a world of magic. Their magic is quite a bit different. Only men can be part of the Duk society, which is very respectable and secretive to the rest of the Tolai. They work with spirits, perform ritual dances, and cannot be looked upon by women or children. They can really only look at each other, and the men of the tribes can watch their performances. They typically wear masks to invoke either the male spirit or the female spirit, along with huge capes of bushy leaves. The rituals were so secret and their festivals so closely guarded that up until recently, supposedly strangers were only allowed to watch if they agreed to be killed after, and the Duk only appear on the full moon. For centuries, they were considered to be the wielders of justice. They were involved in all tribal matters and were the ones who would often execute people. They would carry out punishments while dressed in their traditional masks and capes, burning people's houses down, and sometimes even massacring them. Now, in the 21st century, the Duk of New Guinea have all but faded away. They still do the dances, but mostly as a tourist attraction and to keep at least some of their traditions alive. Fairies in Ireland. Outside the major cities and large towns, Ireland is still a land of folklore and mysticism. In fact, there are still 5 ancient places in Ireland where you can supposedly spot fairies or pixies moving from one realm to another. In Irish lore, the fairies were also known as little people who lived in the forest underground or in a parallel world. Fairies rarely allow themselves to be seen by regular people, but often cause mischief. Your luck and health could be directly affected by fairies, so you didn't want to make them angry. Of course, local myths are not quite as prevalent in society as they used to be, but Irish folklore is still a big part of the culture. Take Greenan of Alliach, for example, a preserved ring fort or a fairy fort in Donegal. There were once about 60,000 such ring forts, but very few remain now, and even less remain still standing. This one dates back to at least 2,000 years ago. It was used by the O'Neill clan from between the 5th and 12th centuries, and is now known as a hotspot for supernatural occurrences. People still come to this ancient fort to commune with the fairies. Secret society in Pompeii. Just shy of 2,000 years ago, Pompeii must have been a truly strange and mysterious place to behold. After Mount Vesuvius erupted in the year 79 and Pompeii was covered in ash, it would have been a no-go zone for centuries. People would have been scared to get near Pompeii, as it would have been a dead place, with the humans who once lived there transformed into statues, as if they'd gotten into a staring contest with Medusa. But before Pompeii became the most haunted place in Europe, it was a totally normal city. Scientists even recently discovered the lodge of a secret society. The secret society was a group of engineering specialists called agrimensors. They used extremely sophisticated measuring tools as part of their craft, a secret which was well guarded and made them wildly important. They held meetings in a structure named the House of Orion. According to researchers with the Great Pompeii Project, an initiative to restore the ancient city, they found images of the society's special tools on the floor, specifically a tool called a groma, which was originally developed in Egypt and then used by Greek and Roman surveyors. These agrimensors most likely operated out of the House of Orion, kind of like a primitive version of the Freemasons. They held sacred their measuring principles and safeguarded the knowledge of the builders going back millennia. They quite literally had the power to make or break a city. Thanks for watching! What's your favorite mysterious land from ancient history? Let us all know in the comments below. And be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. See you soon! Bye!